few reasons why you want to keep a pencil sharpener in your survival pack. A lot of them are made of magnesium, and that's the kind you want. I'm scraping fine shavings off of it with the back of my knife. Then I'll ignite these with a spark. Magnesium dust burns extremely hot at over 4,000 degrees. Now I'm going to grab some dry sticks. Then I'll stick them in the sharpener like I would a pencil, making a bunch of shavings. It's a really quick and easy way to make lots of dry tinder for getting a fire started. It's a good option for if you don't feel like making feather sticks. Then you're left with a bunch of sticks that have very sharp points, and these can be used as mini spears, like for frog gigging. Just imagine if that was a frog. Or a squirrel. So to get a fire started, I would make my shavings, then combine them with all the dry tinder. Then I'll give it a spark with my ferro rod. The magnesium will spark very hot and then ignite the tinder. One of the best and most efficient ways to cook food in the wilderness, the Swedish torch. Take a small section of log and split it into quarters. Then shave off the inside corners of each section, but only about 2/3 the length of the log. Then do the same thing to the 3 remaining sections. So now you want to get some small sticks and crisscross them to create a gap in between each section for airflow. Then wrap it up with some wire to hold it all together, and this is what we're left with. So now I'm going to light a fire inside of the log. At this point, you just want to keep feeding small dead twigs inside of the torch to get your fire going. Get your bacon ready because your torch is getting hot and it's ready to cook over. This log I'm using wasn't the best because it has a lot of moisture in it, so I'm just going to keep feeding small twigs into it to get it nice and hot. Everything in the woods is very wet this time of year, but it still burns well and cooked my bacon nicely, and I was able to heat up some coffee. I'm going to take some rocks and boil them. I'll put as many in there as I can. I'm going to show you a little trick on how to dry your wet boots and socks, gloves while you're out in the woods. After the rocks boil for about 10 or 15 minutes, I'll take them out. Since the rocks are hot, the water will evaporate off of them pretty quick. By boiling the rocks instead of putting them directly on the fire, that will ensure that they don't get too hot so they don't melt your boots or burn your clothes. I'll put the rocks in this sock for even more protection, then I'll stuff it in my boot. Then I'll put some in my gloves. The heat from the rocks will dry out the insides of them. Then I'll set them somewhat close to my fire so that the outsides will dry as well. Just not too close to your fire. You don't want them to burn or get too hot and dry too fast. That is what you call a pine knot. Lighter wood, fat wood, there's all different kinds of names for it. This stuff is like gold in the woods. To find this stuff, first you want to locate a bunch of pine trees. And I'm looking for dead fallen pines. The fat wood is going to be located in these dead branches coming off the tree. You can also find it in dead branches on live trees, but they're too high up and harder to get to. You can find it in the center of dead pine stumps as well, but in my area I do better finding it in the branches. You want to cut the branch flush with the trunk of the tree. You can see it's a solid amber colored wood because of its high resin content. And it smells so good. It has a very, very strong pine scent. It smells like turpentine. Most of the dead branch is going to be rotted, and only about a 4 or 5 inch section of the branch that's closest to the trunk will be saturated with resin. So I'm going to shave all the rotten wood off of this branch. But this is about as much fat wood as I'm going to usually get out of one of these larger branches. Now I'll show you why this stuff is so great to have out here. I'll make some fine shavings from this piece, take my ferro rod and give it some sparks. This stuff is highly flammable because it's so saturated with resin, so it lights on fire very easily, almost like soaking a piece of wood in kerosene. Great stuff for getting a fire going, or for torches, or even nice pine-scented candles. I'm going to show you how to make a long-lasting torch with all-natural materials. This might look like an ordinary log, but it's actually one of the most valuable things you can find in a survival situation. This is a dead pine branch, and most of this is all rotten, but this is what we're after, that beautiful amber-colored wood. The end of the log is full of pine resin, which burns like kerosene, like I showed in my fat wood video. I'm going to take the end of the log, split it once this way, and then this way. Depending on how big the branch is, this torch can burn anywhere from half an hour to over an hour. So I made my first split, and then I shoved a twig into it to keep it open. Then I'll do the same for the other split. So that's what we have so far. To make this a little easier to light, I'm going to split a small piece in the center. And you can see how easily that's going up in flames. And it's wind resistant. Now you can carry this around so you can see in the dark. If you want, you can stick it in the ground, use it as a tiki torch. This is also a great way to get a fire going if everything in the woods is wet after a long rain or during a rain. Put it on the bottom and then put all your wet kindling on top and it'll dry out the wood in no time. I'm going to dig my first hole in the sand about a foot or a foot and a half deep. Then after that, I'm going to dig a second hole upwind of this one. Then I'll tunnel it all the way down to the bottom of the first hole. You want to do this in semi-wet sand. If it's too dry, it'll just cave in on itself. But if it's too wet, your holes will fill up with water. Now the holes are connected. Then I'll build a little mound around the first hole I dug. Not necessary, but it adds a little more depth. Then I'll shave a fat wood feather stick so that I can make a fire in this. This is a Dakota fire hole in the sand. Pretty much a rocket stove in the ground. Making a fire this way makes it burn very hot and efficiently, which is great for cooking food or boiling water. It keeps your fire protected from the wind. The wind will actually help your fire instead of blowing the flames everywhere. It's also known as a stealth fire, which produces very little smoke as well. As the fire burns, it draws in fresh air through the air intake tunnel, and it's not necessary, but it does help putting the air intake hole upwind of the fire hole, because as the wind blows, it'll travel through the tunnel first into the base of your fire, which will stoke it. They're one of the best survival foods that you're going to find in the woods. They're loaded with fats, carbohydrates, protein, vitamins, and minerals. The only problem with acorns is they contain a lot of tannic acid, or tannins. So if you eat one, it's going to be very bitter. Wow, that's bad. So you have to get that tannic acid out of the acorn. To do that, you have to leach the tannins out of the acorn with water. This is a white oak acorn. They're still slightly bitter, but not nearly as bitter as the red oak acorns. Much better. If you find acorns with a hole in them, they're no good because they're going to have a worm in them called an acorn weevil larva. First thing I'll do with the rest of the ones I find is dump them in a pot of water. The bad ones will float and I'll take those ones out. The good ones will sink, so I'll gather up all the good ones, put them in a t-shirt, and crack them open. Then I'll take the meat out of them and put them in a pot. Fill it up with water, then I'll fill up a second pot with water. I'll put them on my fire and bring both of them to a boil. Then I'll let the acorns boil for about 15 minutes. And you can see how brown the water is with the acorns in it. That's all the tannins that I have boiled out of them. So I'll dump this water out, and they're still going to have some tannins left in them, so I'm going to boil them again in the second pot of water. So you just want to repeat this process over and over again several times until the water runs clear, or close to clear. So I boiled these and changed the water 8 times. Now they're about done. I roasted them a bit. Now I'll eat them. And you can salt them if you have salt. They still have a slight bitter taste to them, but not nearly as bad as before I boiled them. I'm going to show you how to make oil out here in the woods. Birch bark is loaded with oil. I'm going to be extracting the oil. You'll need a couple things for this. One is a metal can of some kind. Has to have a lid. And I've poked 3 holes in the lid, and I've poked a hole in the bottom of the can, right in the center. I've bent the bottom in kind of a rounded shape. And a soup can or something. Now I'm going to dig a hole in the ground in the middle of my fire pit. This will be where the empty soup can goes. Then I'll fill in the sides, trying not to get any dirt into the can. Then I'll take a bunch of birch bark and roll it up, then stuff it into the other can. I'll put the lid on. I'll set this on top of the soup can. I'll bury the bottom with about an inch of dirt or so. Then I'll add these rocks around it just so it doesn't tip over. Then I'll use some birch bark to get a fire going. Then I'll build the fire around the can. So I'm going to let this cook for about 1.5 to 2 hours. You can see the gases escaping from the can are on fire. Once all those gases burn out, it'll be about done. I'll scrape the ashes and dirt out of the way, and then I'll pull the can up. Now we have extracted the birch oil. The oil is going to have some water in it, but it'll separate. You can make glue with it or use it to treat your tools or leather, or even as a bug repellent. It has all kinds of uses. Now I'm going to do something similar with fat wood. You can do that with 2 metal cans like you would birch oil, or you can use aluminum foil like I'm doing here. This way you can see what's going on a little better. The wood is wrapped up in foil, then I'll put this on the coals. You don't want the fire to be too big, you just want a bed of hot coals. I have a small can at the bottom of the foil to collect the pine tar. Now I'll let it sit and heat up. And it won't take long for the tar to start oozing out of the sticks. It's funneling right down the foil into the can. And like I said, you don't want your fire to be too hot or else it'll burn through the foil. And if the flames touch the tar, it'll ignite. So I'll take this off. It's been about half an hour. This batch turned hard when it cooled down, but when I'm ready to use it, I'll heat it up again. It can be used for waterproofing wood, making glue and soap, or even make candles with it. I'm going to show you how I keep mosquitoes away with a cattail. First, I got to dry these cattail heads out. You could leave them out in the sun for about a week and they'll dry that way, but I don't feel like waiting, so I'm going to try and speed dry them. So I'm going to put them in this metal pot and leave them sit over the fire for a few hours. They may or may not be burnt to a crisp, but we'll find out. Not looking too bad. Some of the ones on the bottom are pretty burnt, but the rest of them are looking good. Now I'm going to light one and it'll burn just like a cigar. It'll smolder and create lots of smoke. Then I'll put these in my holders and surround my campsite with them. Bugs hate smoke, so this is a great way to keep them away. You just want to make sure you dry them out somehow like I did, or else they won't burn. Then just place them upwind of wherever you're going to be hanging out and you'll be good to go. You'll be breathing in smoke, but at least you'll be bug free. I like to make a bunch of these beforehand and keep them in my pack for when I need them. Great for fishing on those bug-filled summer evenings. They usually burn for about 45 minutes to an hour.